Welcome to Success with award-winning journalist JoDee Kenney. Hear the secrets of success from brilliant minds in the business, entertainment, literary, and fitness worlds, and JoDee Kenney herself.
Today's interviewee is a child of two parents who grew up during the Depression. Her dad joined the Marine Corps during the Korean War and went on to build a career in the insurance industry. Her mother, she was a nurse. They had 6 children. One of them would become Albany, New York's 75th mayor and the first woman in history for the city to do that. Today, I am talking with the Honorable Kathy Sheehan.
How are you?
I am so excited and honored that you've taken the time to talk to me. I really am.
Oh, well, thank you for inviting me into this conversation.
So, I want to go way back. Okay, Mom and Dad, you were born in Chicago, Illinois back in 1963, but you were raised in Ohio. What number child were you?
So, I was the 3rd child, but the 2nd pregnancy. So, my mother had twins. And then 17 months later, she had me. And so I was sort of the easy child. They were used to having to do 2 of everything. And I came along and there was just 1 of me. So that's an interesting little fact about birth order in my family.
It's so true. But, so you were actually kind of like the number 2, but you were really the number 3.
Right.
And my number 3 is the easiest one of the bunch, too.
Well, there you go.
She just kind of goes along with the flow.
Yeah.
So what was it like being raised in Ohio? Talk about your childhood a little bit.
Well, we moved around growing up. So we lived in Chicago until I finished 1st grade. And I measure everything by what grade I was in, not by how old I was. And we moved to Louisville, Kentucky. My dad worked for the same insurance company his whole life, but he was transferred. So every time we moved, it was because my dad received a promotion. So while we were leaving a place that we liked, we knew that we were moving to a new adventure. And we lived in Louisville for about 5 years. And then we moved to St. Louis, and we lived there for 2 years. And then my dad was offered his choice. He could go to Atlanta, Georgia, New York City, Honolulu, Hawaii, or Cleveland, Ohio. And he picked Cleveland.
Oh, my goodness.
So we moved to the Cleveland area when I was in high school. I started my freshman year of high school there, and I went to high school and college in Ohio, and most of my siblings still live in Ohio.
Oh, do they really?
Yeah.
So you and I have something in common. We've moved around a lot during our youth. I moved around a lot because of the military. And I do feel that kind of formed who I am. I'm able to make friends and become friendly with people, probably more so than if I had been in the same location. I don't know. I just feel like that's just been a benefit of mine. What do you feel moving around has contribute to who you are today?
I think that it does result in being more flexible, being more open to change, not being afraid of change. Because when you move and you go through that experience and you make new friends and you are in a new community and you do it, it builds that confidence that you can handle change. And I think that it definitely helped me in building confidence. I remember when we moved to Louisville, my father had said, well, the people down there talk a little funny because we were from Chicago. And I was old enough to say, well, when we move there, they're going to think I talk funny because they all sound the same. And so that was really intimidating to me at first. But it was, again, being able to get through that and to make friends and to see that we could adapt and change. And I think the other thing that it resulted in is that I'm really close with my brothers and sisters, because when we would move, it was always at the end of a school year. So we had that whole summer before we were starting school and making friends. And it really brought us, I think, closer together. So my brothers and sisters are still, my closest friends. And I think that that's another result of it as well.
And you and I also have the fact that we lived in Louisville, Kentucky together.
Oh, I
didn't live
that.
At the same time, but yes, I lived in Louisville as well. And I say Louisville.
That's right. We say it the right way.
Because you don't say Louisville. And you don't say Louisville.
No.
I was taught that.
Definitely don't say Louisville.
Yeah,
that. Yeah, no, then we know they're an outsider. Right.
But I thought that you said something that was really interesting to me. You said you had the mind that you understood that you may be considered different. I think that that's very insightful into your ability to look at situations in a different perspective.
Yeah, I think that it is important to be able to see things from different perspectives and to recognize that our own self-view isn't necessarily the only view, and that ability to sort of empathize or step outside and say, well, I wonder what this person's situation really is, or that if I had been exposed to that experience, how would I think about, what it is that, I'm presenting at this point in time. And so I think part of it is, jumping way ahead. When you go to law school, you learn how to argue the other side of a case, and that makes you a better lawyer. I think growing up, having moved around and really recognizing that the world is an interesting place, and there are different, cultures even within that area where I moved to. Louisville was different from Chicago, which was different from St. Louis, but to be able to know that you can learn a lot about a place and adapt and figure out where your place is there. I think it really opens the mind.
It really does. Now, you grew up in a family that really valued hard work. I understand that your maternal grandfather, he drove a truck for Standard Oil, but he also had a history being in politics in the Democratic Party. He was the leader of the Democratic Party in his hometown in Illinois, right?
That's right. And I grew up, he passed away when my mother had just gotten out of nursing school. And so long before us kids came along. And but he was just such a well-regarded and well-respected man. There were people in my town in Deerfield who would say, oh, I knew your grandfather, and he was just such a wonderful person and really involved in the community and really cared about the community. So he was so highly regarded, and I grew up with stories of him being involved in the Democratic Party. We lived in Lake County, which was mostly Republican, so it was he really worked hard for the Democratic Party. Adlai Stevenson, when Adlai Stevenson ran for president. So it was just part of the stories that I heard growing up. And my parents were always politically, I wouldn't say community-oriented and politically active in that they always talked about elections, they always voted, they always talked about how important it was to vote, how important it was to be paying attention and to care about the issues.
That's interesting because it definitely laid the groundwork for future discussion as we go down the line of your history. And then your paternal grandfather, he was a steam fitter, and I found that it was just really powerful that he raised his 3 sons because he was a widow.
That's right. My dad's mother passed away when my dad was young. He was 13 years old. His brothers were away at the war, and she had been very sick. She had breast cancer, and it had gone to her bones. And so, back at that time, it was just a really difficult time. And my father ended up being one of his mother's caretakers, and helping to take care of her. And so it really did have, I think, an impact. But I look back at, I have letters, I have postcards that my uncles were sending to my father when they were in training camp, getting ready to go off to the war. And just the tenderness and the closeness of that family and how they kind of came together around one another through that very difficult time is something that has always inspired me. And it's just part of who my dad was.
And your parents really stressed education to you.
Absolutely. Education was not something that was optional. It was always talked about as when you go to college, not if you go to college, and the importance of doing the best that you could. I think another great thing that my parents did was they treated each of us as individuals. So it was never, why can't you be more like? You hear that in some families. Right. My parents expected us to do the best that we could do. Based on our own ability. And that really was something that was important for them, and it was important that we respect one another and that we respect one another's uniqueness and own gifts and abilities.
As a parent, I wonder if, I say the same things to my children, and I wonder if sometimes I'm being too hard on them, because I do, I look at them individually and I expect them to step up to their greatness that I know is inside them. Did you feel the pressure as a child to that, or did you just realize that is my destiny?
I think it was just that was the expectation.
Yeah.
I just didn't question things. I have a son who's 16, and it seems, and it's not unique to him. I see it in my nieces and nephews as well, that they'll push back and they question a lot of things. And my husband and I look at each other and we're like, were we just really slow? Like, it never occurred to me to challenge this premise. It never occurred to me to say to my dad, why do I have to do this? So I think there were a lot of things that, my parents just led by example, and they set an expectation, and we sought to live up to that expectation.
I think it may be generational, because I have that happening in my house as well.
Yeah.
Every little thing they question, right?
Right.
Oh gosh, well, maybe we need to do a podcast on that. Successful parenting of children of today.
Yeah, exactly. If someone can crack that one, I would listen.
Seriously. So now you heard these messages that you're going to go to college and this is what is expected of you. Not too many people stop and think at age 12, I need to start saving for college.
Oh, well, that was always part of the conversation. We needed to
it.
work so that we could save for college, because we were going to go to college. And so when I was 12, I was pushed out the door, go find some babysitting jobs.
Yeah.
And my sisters and I literally made up flyers, and we would put them in people's mailboxes and advertise our babysitting services. And when I would come home from a babysitting job, I always had to give some of the money to my dad, and he'd let me have a little, he called it walking around money. So if I had $4, I had to give him $3, and I could keep $1, and he put the $3 in an envelope and would deposit it in my bank account to save money for college.
I love that.
Yeah.
Because it gave you a sense of, you worked for it. It's not you didn't take advantage of the fact that you were going to college. You actually worked for that money to go to college.
Absolutely.
You did the sweat equity.
That's right. That's right.
So you went to college. You earned your bachelor's degree in journalism. We're fast forwarding a little bit. You went to school and you got a degree in journalism. I got to stop and say that because it's notable to me as a journalist. And you started a small career in communications. Talk a little bit about your stint. I heard you called it a stint.
Yes, a stint.
As a journalist.
Well, I did work for a brief time while I was still in school. I worked as a television reporter in Toledo, Ohio. I was the weekend reporter at the ABC affiliate there. I made $5 an hour.
I know. I made the same. Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
Weren't you proud though? Was
yeah.
it $5 an hour?
It was great. It was more than minimum wage.
I know.
So, it was a brief stint. And then when I graduated, I really needed to find a full-time job. So I moved back home and I worked a lot of different freelance jobs. I did research. I wrote, I did temp work. And eventually I got a job producing a show out here. That's what brought me out to this area. I got a job working for a company called Television Home Finders Guide. And this was back in 1987. Mm-hmm. And it was a real estate show that was on Sunday mornings. And all of the houses were open. So you could watch the show and see where all the open houses were in the region. And each week we would feature some interesting park or cultural institution or festival that was going on. We had a hostess, and so I was responsible. I produced the whole show. So I wrote the scripts, and I had to go out and get the locations and do the research on the locations and put everything together and produce the show.
I think that show could probably work today.
Yeah, well, now everybody has the internet. But
that's true.
That's
true, but pretty homes.
Yeah. But it was a great way to know this area.
Right.
So I really got to know the whole region because we had realtors in Albany, Schenectady, Troy, Saratoga. And so I really had to give fair treatment to all the different communities and everything in between. And so I really came to this area and got a regional perspective of what a treasure the Capital Region is. I really fell in love with just how beautiful it is here and the uniqueness of each of the cities. And it was really a great way to get to know what is now my home.
I love the fact that you said you fell in love with it.
I did. I really didn't want to leave after I came.
Even with all the snow sometimes.
Even with all the snow.
Although we've had a pretty good year this year. In 1991, you went back to school and you worked on your law degree, right?
That's right.
So what made you decide that you wanted to go back to school? I mean, it's a complete shift. You did journalism and then you wanted to go to law school.
Yeah, I had always thought about going back to school. And once I really started to think about it seriously, I had been a political science minor. So I had always been interested in politics. When I was in undergrad, I did an internship in D.C. with a broadcasting company. Oh, yeah. So I always had an interest in politics and policy. Never thought I would run for office, but I really liked sort of the policy piece of it. And so I was thinking about going back to school and getting my MPA. And I will be completely honest, I got one of the books of how to study for the GRE, and there was math in it. And I was never really, beyond, I can do arithmetic, but beyond that, the Pythagorean theorem, all of this stuff, I mean, it was just so ancient to me. I hadn't done it since high school. And so I was in the bookstore and I pulled out the study guide for the LSAT. And I said, oh, hey, there's no math in here. This is all reason and logic. I like this stuff. So I started studying for the LSAT and decided I would go to law school.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was really kind of what made the decision for me. I had always, I kind of been going back and forth as to whether to get a master's degree. The other thing that I loved about getting a law degree too is that, you have a license. So it's a profession. And no matter what, you can always hang out your own shingle. So really kind of being able to have a little more control over what my future might be, and the flexibility to really determine that was something that was also attractive to me about law school.
Yeah. So you started your legal career. You were at Bond, Shennick and King. That's where
right.
You started. And then you went on to work at Intermagnetics General Corporation. I've never heard of that corporation. Are they still?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
so Intermagnetics makes MRI magnets.
Oh, okay.
And it's based up in Latham. I went to work there, started out as corporation counsel, and eventually became general counsel and then vice president and corporate secretary. So I was secretary to the board as well. And it was just a wonderful, phenomenal opportunity. Great job, great group of people that I worked with, great company. We expanded, we bought some other medical device companies, and then eventually we were purchased by Philips Medical Systems because Philips was our biggest customer. And so we were a key component. The magnet in an MRI system is really sort of the key to you build the electronics around the magnet as opposed to vice versa. So eventually we were purchased by Philips, and that was then the shift from being in a much more entrepreneurial, fast-moving, really great senior executive team to becoming part of this really big Dutch company. And it just, the job really shifted. So I decided to leave after I worked there for just under a year after the transition, after we were purchased, helped with the transition, with the merger, and then decided to move on.
Now, during this time, you got married.
Yes. Oh, I got married during law school.
Yeah. Oh, during law school. Okay.
Yes.
So even when you were a student, talk about Bob, Robert. Bob.
Yeah, Bob. It's funny. I met Bob when I first came to the area, and I was up in Saratoga with my boss. The company that I worked for, the Television Home Finder's Guide, was based in Skaneateles, New York, which is this small town outside of Syracuse. And so my boss came out to help me get set up with my office and everything that I needed. And we went into the Old Bryan Inn in Saratoga. I don't know if you know that restaurant, but great little restaurant. And there was Bob Sheehan, and he's from Skaneateles. So my boss knew him. My boss had gone to high school with Bob's brothers. And so that was how we were introduced. And it took him a while to get a clue and ask me out, But eventually he did, and the rest, as they say, is history.
So you guys have been a team. I do know that, you guys have worked together and you guys have volunteered a lot together in the community and have really kind of been a united front to participating in community events and really caring about what goes on in your community.
Absolutely. I mean, Bob became involved when we bought our first house. He got involved in the neighborhood association, which was relatively new, and eventually became president of the neighborhood association. I mean, he's always been, a person who we don't just show up. We actually, sign up to help to get things done. So whether it's youth soccer or youth hockey or a neighborhood cleanup, whatever it takes, we've Bob is a great leader and community member. Community service is really important to him as well. So it's a good match.
And I understand that you credit your son in also reasons why it's important that you guys do community service, because your son, obviously he is a part of the community as well, but he was instrumental in really kind of solidifying your volunteerism. Talk a little bit about how having your son has impacted.
Well, I think when you have a child and you want them to have opportunities, you also see how many other children there are that don't necessarily have the ability to create those opportunities for themselves. And if you don't have parents that step up and that can do the work, then it really impacts what's available in our community. So when my son was interested in football and did Pop Warner football, they needed a parent to step up and be the commissioner for the team. And I'm pretty well organized, and so I said, all right, I can be the commissioner for the team. And I love football. I absolutely love football. So it's really recognizing that if you want your kid to be involved in something, that oftentimes you need to step up and be willing to do the work to make it happen.
It's so true. Can you believe it? I'm actually a Taekwondo coach.
There you go.
Because I want to be there down in the ring supporting my kids. It's so true, though.
Right.
But I think, children do give you a different perspective on what you do. I think we do a lot of community service events as adults, but then when you have children, you're like, okay, I am actually making a true difference
That's right.
in people. I don't know. I just found that, parenthood kind of changed my purpose when I volunteered.
Yeah. Getting involved in the schools. I was treasurer of the PTA, and we were trying to raise money to build a playground. So, all of those things take on another level of importance, and everybody has, different talents and abilities. Yeah. And that's one of the things that, when I see people who volunteer, whatever anybody can give, whether it's an hour a week or an hour a month or an hour a year, it matters. It makes a difference. So
it really does. Yeah. So you helped your husband run for Common Council back in 2005. He ran unsuccessfully. How did that affect you, first of all, as a wife? Before we even talk about how you decided after that, challenge to run for yourself. But how did that affect you as a wife? Because when I see anybody I love go through any kind of, tension, stress, hard work, and not being able to achieve the goal that they want to achieve, it breaks my heart. It breaks a little piece off, and it wounds me as well. So how did it affect you?
Well, certainly it was disappointing, but he ran. It was an open seat. He was not the Democratic Party's endorsed candidate. And I think, he just wanted to do it for all the right reasons. And he knew when he got into it that it was a long shot, but that it was a great way for him to get to know the community better and know our neighbors and what issues are important to them in a deeper way. And, the interesting thing about it is that the school year started right before the primary, and we walked into my son's classroom, and there at his little desk, he was starting kindergarten, was my son's name next to the son of the individual that my husband was running against. And it helped to solidify for us that, after a race, we're all members of the same community, and we need to work together. So there was no animosity. It wasn't, a race where, there was any mudslinging. It was just two guys who really wanted to do the best for the neighborhood, the community, and serve, as a Common Council member. So, the way that Bob responded to it really kind of laid the groundwork for recognizing that we do this because it's about serving the community, not about us as individuals. And it was never about, Bob's own ego. It was about serving the community. And he found many other ways to serve the community. And, probably in the long run, it was a better pathway for him and better suited his talents to be able to be on the board of Albany Youth Soccer and do all of the other things that he's been able to do.
I love that response. It's about the community.
Right.
So how is it out of that experience you decide that you want to run for mayor?
Well, I never thought that I would run for office. I always, everybody kind of talks smack every once in a while, right? You're like, if I ran the world, I could do that job, right?
Exactly.
But it's really a whole nother ball game to actually put yourself out there and do it. And so the way that it happened for me was that I had been involved, as I said, in PTA. I helped candidates run, would go out and get petitions for Paul Tonko or for school board candidates, and was, active in that way. And so there were people who knew me and knew about my corporate background, knew that I had left my corporate job. And so there was a small group of people that approached me and said, we'd really like for you to run for city treasurer because the treasurer is becoming the controller. There was a change in the charter.
That's right.
And, we're really looking for somebody who has a background that understands internal controls and, how to really look at financing and bonding and all of these things that impact the city's finances. And I said, absolutely not. I'm not running for office. I don't know why anybody would do that. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I could complain about what I didn't like, or I could actually do something about it. And I was in a position where I literally didn't have anything to lose because I was just working as a consultant. I was doing a little bit of legal work. So I had the time and I had the ability to run. And so I said, all right, you're going to have to help me, and I'm going to need a lot of volunteers and a lot of feet on the street. But if people are willing to do that, then I'll run. And so I decided to run, and I won. And then once I was here as an elected official and as the treasurer, I really saw that I thought I had a skill set that the city could really use at this point in the city's history, in looking at the challenges that we faced. And I knew that Jerry Jennings was seriously considering not running again for another term. And it was something that I did talk to him about early on. And I decided I'm going to get out there, I'm going to announce that I'm running, and he's going to decide whatever he decides. But I really think that I have a skill set that is what the city needs at this point. We have a lot of financial challenges. We need to make some difficult decisions. We needed to modernize our IT systems. We really needed to be able to sort of change and be willing to change our accountability around, being able to give more information to the public. You look now at, even just in the last 3 years, what's happened with Twitter and Facebook and the instantaneousness with which people expect to have information. And in order to give information that quickly, we had to change our IT systems and our ways of even gathering information and providing information. So, I thought that my background was something that would be beneficial to the city at this point in time, and decided to run.
So how does that conversation go? He has not announced that he's retiring yet. Mm-hmm. Do you come to his office and knock on the big wood door, and what happens next? That's
exactly what I did. So I said, you had indicated to me back when, the mayor was really gracious. When I won the primary, he invited me into his office and we talked, and it was, really, he was very gracious about the fact that, again, I wasn't the candidate that he supported, but I had won, and that he looked forward to working with me. And at that time, he had said, I don't think I'm going to run again, or I'm not going to run again.
So you came in and you said, I'm thinking about this. I need to talk to you about this. And he's like, I'm thinking I'm not going to run.
So, well, that was in 2009 when we had that conversation. So now fast forward to 2000, and towards the end of 2012.
Yeah. And
I came and I said, you had indicated to me a few years ago that you didn't think you were going to run again. I'm planning on running, and I would love your support. And at that time he said, well, I'm thinking I might run again. I haven't decided yet. And I said, I respect that, and I'm going to announce that I'm running for mayor, not against anybody. And, I have a lot of respect for what you've accomplished. And I talked a lot about a number of his accomplishments. I mean, and there are many. And I think that Jerry Jennings was one of the best, cheerleaders and still is. And I mean that in, the nicest way possible for the city of Albany. He truly loves the city.
He does.
And has done tremendous things for the city. So I have a lot of respect for him and his legacy. But I felt that it was time to pass the baton. And I think actually that was the term that I used. And so, as it worked out, he did decide that he wasn't going to run again. And I moved forward with my campaign.
Wow. I'm in awe of the fact that you came in and, you didn't say I'm thinking, you said I'm going to run.
Well, I had decided at that point that I was going to do it.
Yeah.
And I thought that it was time. And I think that that's something that, the term lean in gets used a lot now. That was before that book was published, but it was me leaning in.
Yeah. So you went through the election cycle, but your parents passed away in 2013. That must have been 6 weeks apart from each other. And I know it's right before you were elected. They didn't get to see it.
Nope.
How did that, everybody has their ups and downs in their career. This must have been something that really just, affected you seriously.
It was really difficult. I mean, I was so close to my parents. Mm-hmm. They were two of the most amazing people in my life. I mean, I know a lot of people say that about their parents, but, they were just truly, if I could be half the parent that my parents were, I'd be happy. But they were so supportive. And my mother had MS, and she had MS for 40 years. And to see the grace and the determination and the stubbornness with which she handled, what is really becomes a devastating illness. Towards the end of her life, she could not transfer herself from her bed to the wheelchair. She really needed total care. And all of us cared for her. All of us took turns, even though they were far away. I would get back to Ohio as much as possible. My father was her caretaker, and my parents lived at home until they passed away. So my father, we knew, was dying. He had cancer, and we knew that it had spread. And so he was placed in hospice care at home in about February of 2013. And I went to visit him in May for Memorial Day weekend, brought my son out, my husband. We went to see him, and we had found a place for my mother, an assisted living facility for my mother. And so we were talking about the arrangements with my dad. And my mother got up from a nap. The nurse brought her out, and I took one look at my mother, and I said, something doesn't look right. She doesn't look right. And I called her doctor, and her doctor said, she could have pneumonia. You need to bring her to the hospital. And she passed away 1 week later. And so in a way, it was a shock because we didn't realize, MS isn't terminal.
And you were preparing for
Right. We were preparing for my dad's passing. Yeah. And, but my dad's biggest worry was my mother. Nobody could take care of her like he did. And she had dementia towards the end, so she didn't really know who we were, but she always knew who my father was. And at her funeral, my youngest brother gave the eulogy, and he joked about how we would all tease each other about who was mom's favorite. But really, we all knew that my dad was my mom's favorite. And so they were soulmates. And so in a strange way, it was a blessing that they were able to pass at the same time. And for my dad to know that, my mom was home. So it was hard, but it's also hard to see your parents suffer. And, that was the other thing. Towards the end, my dad was just in so much pain. And, they did a really great job with the medication, but, we knew it was just a matter of time. And he said, my father was a lifelong Republican. I don't talk about that much. And he did say to me, I'd like to live long enough to see my daughter become mayor, even if she is a Democrat. Oh. And but I did call him because I knew it was hard. And I said, Dad, I think I'm going to win. And, the polling looks pretty good. And I don't want you to suffer any longer than you need to. Because, sometimes people hang on. And I didn't want that on my conscience because, he was really suffering. So he passed in July.
Wow.
So, but I knew that they were smiling down on me.
Yeah.
And, it's still hard. I still miss them. But I also know that, again, they were... they gave me everything that anybody could ever possibly ask for.
So then you go through, this is a very life-altering, few months for you. And yet you're in the middle of this, political battle.
Right.
The polling was accurate. You ended up winning with 53% of the vote, and I think 53, right?
I don't remember, whatever it was, but...
you get to election day, and what's that like as a candidate? Because I always just look at politicians and I wonder, what are they going through? Because that's looking to achieve a level of success that you've worked for years, really.
Well, and it's also the people around you.
It's a
I
team,
had
right?
I had an amazing team, and we had this fellowship program. So I had all these young people who were just so enthusiastic, who knocked doors, who made phone calls, who worked really hard. And so, it's almost not even so much my own, nervousness for me, but not wanting to let down the team and all the people who supported me. So it's nerve-wracking. And even as the numbers came in, and, it becomes clear when you start to look at votes and wards and how many votes in each ward that, you get to a point where you're
like, this is
your margin is insurmountable. But, I'm one of those no, they need to count every last vote. Are you sure? What about the absentee ballots?
Right.
And they're like, no, you actually, I think the primary I won by over 60%. So it was, it was pretty clear. So, and it was exciting. It was exciting to see that all that hard work, paid off.
So the day after election, did you sleep in really late, or did you wake up? Like, I can imagine that your body's just on adrenaline dump.
I have absolutely no recollection. I really don't know. I actually think that I had a mammogram that's scheduled for the day after the election. That's what I remember. Yeah, I think that was what I had scheduled the day after the you just go on with your life, right? It's like, oh, okay, I can't do this on this day. I'll schedule it for the next. But yeah, it's all that whole time then is a little bit of a blur, because then you're in, and once I had won the primary, I still had the general, and it was pretty clear that I was going to win the general, because in Albany the numbers are absolutely in your favor, but I don't take anything for granted.
Right, yeah.
And so, but it's then planning for, hiring commissioners and getting a staff in place and being ready for day one, which turned out to be a 12-inch snowstorm in sub-zero conditions. So we needed to be ready. We needed to be ready.
I remember that.
Yeah.
That was a challenge right off the rip, right?
That's right.
So, I thought a lot about this, and first of all, there's several dynamics here, and I want to talk about Jerry Jennings. Coming into this position after a man who held this for 20 years. I mean, he had the title mayor for life at one time. How do you come in and forge your own path when you're taking over for somebody with that type of legacy?
Well, I think it's exactly what you just said. Forge your own path. You have to be true to yourself. And, I could never match Jerry Jennings' charisma, the way that he fills a room.
Hey, babe. Hey. He walks into the room. He's just got
and he still does, right? He makes people feel.
He makes you feel like you know him forever, right?
Exactly. And so, I think it's just recognizing that you've got to be true to yourself and redefine what it means to be the mayor and be the type of mayor that I am. And people will either like it or they won't like it. But the worst thing that I could do would be to try to emulate or be something that I'm not. And so I know I'm kind of nerdy. I know that I'm wonky and that I care about numbers and facts. And but I've also learned and grown in the job. And there's a real sincerity in connecting with people as well. So it was funny. I get asked every year to, and Jerry Jennings did too, to welcome the state employee unions. They have a gathering where they do their lobby day, and they have a breakfast.
Yes.
And they always ask the mayor to come and welcome them. So the first year that I did it, I went and did my welcome, and it was my wonky, like, welcome to Albany. And I talked about our history and the land that was once inhabited by Algonquin Indian tribes and how proud we are of our history. This year I went and I talked about, snowstorms and the work that our employees do and what we expect them to do every day and how much because I was knowing my audience, right, and really connecting. And it was funny because one of the union leaders came up to me afterwards. He's like, "You come a long way, kid. The first year you were telling us about history and Indian tribes, and now you're talking about what we really care about." So it's learning how to also connect with people, but in my own genuine way and using my own personality as opposed to trying to emulate or be like somebody else.
And I remember I introduced you at an event recently, and I had your bio that was provided to me by your people,
right?
And you said, "Don't worry about that. Just do a short introduction." You were like, "Don't worry about all that nonsense."
I do find that I don't. I constantly say to them, "Oh, you've got to change this bio," and they'll change it, and even when they make it shorter, it's just
it's just facts on a piece of paper.
Right.
You're a person,
right?
I think,
right.
But I thought that was just a real testament to your personality when you came up to me. You looked at the paper. You're like, "Don't say that. Just a short introduction, please." And I still gave you your props, but I definitely took out some of the facts that were listed. So I thought about Jerry Jennings, and then before I came in to talk with you, I sat in the mayor's conference room.
Mm-hmm.
That is an imposing room. It's a grand room. It has a lot of wood, a big wood table with very sturdy chairs, wood on the walls, very high ceilings with gold and burgundy trim. But what stood out to me is the pictures all around the wall. And 74 men who have been mayors before you, going all the way back to 1686, and I just, looking at all the pictures in their black and white, all of them around the room, and then your picture is on its own post in the middle of the room, and I look at you, and I know people ask you about the glass ceiling. I know that's such a cliche question, but when I sat in that room, I'm getting goosebumps when I say it. I just got goosebumps because I just wonder if when you walk in that room, do you think about what you did, what you are? Well,
it's funny. I don't think about it from a personal perspective, but I do think about it from the perspective of what it represents and what it represents, particularly to young women, and that it does have significance. I want to be judged based on how I do this job, not based on, and you get that. Totally, but I also get that I have to own that it represents something, and it is important for women to see other women succeeding and recognizing that I'm not going to be intimidated or discouraged from trying to achieve what I want to achieve just because every time I walk in this room, because when I was treasurer, I walked into that room a lot, all I see on the wall are men, right? And so it is important symbolically to make sure that we start to change the face of what it means to be in a leadership position, whether that's an elected office, whether it's in the corporate world, no matter where you are. Oftentimes I was the only woman in the room. And I really never allowed that to define me or to intimidate me. I never felt as though I didn't have every bit as much to offer as anyone else sitting in that room. So I think that that's the other piece of it, is that I also feel as though, I earned it. And I look at women all the time who have earned it, and particularly young women who I want to say, you've earned this. You don't have to apologize for it. It's you've earned it. You're there because of who you are, of your talents, of your skills, of your ability, your brain. Own it.
Two things on that note. Do you find that women don't see that in themselves?
I think that there is still a
little insecurity,
right?
Yeah.
Of do I really belong?
Yeah.
And I was just always really pigheaded about it. It just never occurred to me that I didn't belong. If somebody had a problem with it, I thought it was their issue, not mine. So I don't know how I became that way, or whatever it is that maybe it's a little bit of my mother's stubbornness, but
it's good. She rubbed off, right?
Right. Yeah. I never felt like I had to apologize for being the only woman in the room.
And do you see? I've talked with women who feel like sometimes women don't support each other. Mm-hmm. Have you ever experienced that?
I think that it is something that when I do talk to women's groups that I talk a little bit about, is that it's not even so much that we don't support one another, but I think we're really hard on one another. And, I think it's really important that we step back and think about that, because I think that we hold ourselves to a standard that isn't always fair, and that we've got to recognize that, not that you give a woman a free pass, and that's not what I'm suggesting, but that we step back and think about the standard that we're holding that person to, and is it really the same standard that we would hold a male colleague to? And are we really being helpful if we're, focusing on that one area where we might disagree with somebody or think that they have a weakness, as opposed to focusing on what their strengths are and how can we support those strengths and support one another more? And, I think we saw it, not to get too political, but I think, Hillary Clinton was held to a standard that I have never, ever seen a male politician held to, ever. She had to be flawless. She was not forgiven any mistake, any decision that, looking back on it, she might have made a different decision over a 30-year career. I mean, I don't know a single man that can look back on a 30-year career and say, oh, I would have done everything exactly the same and I never made a wrong decision. But that was the standard that she was held to. And women held her to that standard too. So I think that's something that we just need to be aware of. And we still have a long way to go. All the data out there and all the surveys out there show that we have a long way to go as women.
How can we get past that? Because I think the reason why I started this podcast is I wanted to celebrate not only successful women, but although so far I've only interviewed women, but I want to celebrate people striving for success. I want to pull out and honor people who are taking that trip down success, because I don't think success is a destination. I think it is a journey. Mm-hmm. So that's why I started it. And I felt like this is my platform to be able to share the good news. And that's why I reached out to you to share your journey. How do we do that? How do we get this message to the masses?
So I think we have to be aware of our own implicit biases. And we've gone through this recently with the Albany Police Department, talking about implicit bias from the standpoint of race. And we all have implicit biases.
Everybody has a bias.
Everybody. And a lot of them we're just not even aware of. And when we're made aware of them, we say, oh, that's silly, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that with respect to our biases about women, we just have to start being aware of them, being aware of what standard we're holding a person to, and the accountability that we expect from them. And just ask ourselves a simple question. If I look around and I see the same types of whether it's leadership styles or management philosophies from a male, am I holding them to the same standard that I'm holding this woman? right? And I think we just have to take that step back and be aware of the fact that we all hold biases that if we really think about it, that we can then sort of stop ourselves from that next step of making a judgment or a decision based on that implicit bias, and really recognize, all right, I got to gather all the facts and really think through, how I'm going to respond to this person, or how I'm going to be supportive of this person. And we can always help. We can always help other women. And, I think taking that opportunity to really check our biases at the door, women and men, it makes a big difference. And that's where we have to start.
Well, Mayor, I just really have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I could probably go for another hour, but I know you have appointments too.
Yes.
So I really do want to just thank you so very much for spending some time with me. This has truly been a transformational interview for me, and I just really I admire you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. This was great. And I admire the fact that you're doing this. I think it's great. And I wish you great success.
Thank you. I'm out on a ledge right now. It's scary. It's scary. But you know what? It's exhilarating.
Right.
So thank you for being a part of the ride.
Happy to.
So I want to say thank you to the mayor, and also speak to you. If you like what you're hearing, please subscribe and leave me a great review. Share this success with your friends. I'm JoDee Kenney, and here is to building upon your success. And just to let you know, this podcast is sponsored by Ghana Pictures Complete Cinematic Video Production Services, GhanaPictures.com. Thank you, Ghana.